Viserys and Bran paced through the dry wheat fields of the Reach. Gold cloaks from King's Landing had set security, their faces and hands covered in addition to their normal armor. Rhaegal screeched from overhead, his black-cladded brother riding him up and over the sparse cloud cover. Bran covered his eyes from the scorching sun as Sir Jon and his mount screeched from overhead. Viserys thought this was now the proper opportunity to remind Bran he was not alone. A small host of riders broke through the line of gold cloaks. They were nothing more than farmers. Farmers that would not be quarantined to their village to be infected and live out the rest of their lives as stone men. The clumsy gold cloaks attempted to give chase, but their horsemanship was reflective of their capital upbringing. The farmers were not to be denied, and their freedom was attainable despite the royal quarantine. Viserys assumed Bran's involvement as the past caught up with the present. Bran's hand would be forced as his own actions would now be catching up with him. Bran's eyes closed as he could not help himself. Bran now found his mind occupying Rhaegal's, and Viserys was now his guest, though he remained uninvited. Bran was in control of Rhaegal, and he could feel Jon's presence inside the beast. It was reassuring to understand the bond between rider and dragon and the kind of telepathy between the two, Bran realized. It made Bran uneasy, knowing Viserys was learning just as Bran was regarding the dragon bond, and more specifically, Jon's more intimate thoughts. Bran felt guilty and rather embarrassed as he instructed Rhaegal to burn the farmers attempting an escape from quarantine zone. Jon was mortified as Rhaegal acted independently of his own command and pleaded with Rhaegal to withdraw. Bran then directed Rhaegal towards the small village suspected of suffering the grayscale outbreak. Bran could feel Jon's worry as Rhaegal roared and unleashed a firebolts upon the village. Jon wept in reluctance in addition to Bran's tears. Viserys' voice then echoed in Bran's ears.
Interesting. The sacrifice of the infected was not Sir Jon's doing. How very interesting.
Viserys laughed, which just added to Bran's guilt. At the time it seemed necessary. The grayscale was due to expand beyond the borders of the Reach. Bran could see what was possible. A pandemic that would claim nearly 90% of the population of Westeros. What was the lives of a few dozen farmers when compared to millions? Even Bran's most intimate thoughts were not safe from his uninvited passenger.
Indeed, Brandon Stark. You made the decision, not Sir Jon. Impressive result as you weighed the lives of the infected versus the lives of the innocent. Perhaps a cutthroat such as yourself could find himself appointed to my small council.
Viserys laughed, which made Bran weep openly. He had wrestled with this guilt for nearly a decade. Having Viserys inside his head, and by extension inside Jon's mind, was a torture beyond words.
How empathetic are Sir Jon's feelings at the moment? You yourself testified on his behalf when the king brought charges against him. Did you not?
I did, and would again.
Murder, genocide, and lying under oath are just a few of the charges against you, Lord Stark. But we have just begun to discover your treachery. I do admit my disappointment that Sir Jon cannot be held responsible for these deaths.
Viserys continued as Jon's panicked voice echoed inside Bran's ears. Jon was desperate to stop Rhaegal and the slaughter. Mere minutes passed and the village was set aflame. Not a single survivor remained. Viserys seemed comfortable now with withdrawing from Bran's memory. Bran woke to find himself covered in sweat, lying chained on his bed inside his cage. Viserys was with him as he gently stroked the Horn of Winter, a device with ability known to no living man, one of many collections Viserys had acquired over these past 20 years.
Jon later blamed himself for losing control of his dragon, or so he believed. But it was you, Brandon Stark. You murdered those people, farmers, common folk. How could they oppose the omniscient and the wrath of old Valyria?
Viserys inquired as Bran continued to sweat and soak his bedsheets. The body parts that Bran could still feel ached deeply, and his fever worsened. Likely an infection from Viserys consuming his one remaining lifeless leg. It made Bran queasy to his stomach to see his own bones protruding from outside his own flesh. Bran's head jerked towards the faint screams he could hear at a distance. Viserys' head turned the same direction before he offered a brief explanation.
The Red Priestess. Lady Kinvara has begun her labors.
Viserys revealed with a slight triumph in his voice.
Are you aware of what this birth will mean to Westeros?
Viserys asked pompously, and Bran knew this was a fruitless discussion, but it offered Viserys a chance to boast, a far less torturous act than sharing his mind with this student of the Warlocks.
Your travels have weakened you, Lord Stark. We are still to visit Dorne before a son is born to me. First, we must witness my dear cousin's birth before your fever takes you.
Before Bran could protest, again he was pulled into a dream. It was the same dream he had alongside Blood Raven some years ago. Howland Reed and Eddard Stark had just regained their feet following the fall of Sir Arthur Dayne. His body lay face down as Eddard Stark retrieved the longsword Dawn from the dust. Bran then remembered the first time he visited the Tower of Joy. Once set upon from the northern host, Sir Arthur rose to his feet from cleaning his sword. It never occurred to Bran why would a Kingsguard have blood on his sword. They were hundreds of miles from the nearest battle. Still, Dawn was bloodied. Viserys and Bran continued up the staircase following the young Eddard Stark and stepping over the body of Sir Arthur Dayne. Once inside, the smell of freshly spilled blood filled their noses. Lyanna lay upon her birthing bed as Ned fell to her side in an attempt to comfort her. Viserys examined the longsword Dawn that Eddard propped against the foot of his sister's bed. Viserys gasped as he had just realized something. That was Bran's assumption. Before Bran could inquire as to the day's lesson, Bran was pulled from his vision. The smell of blood vanished and the musty underground scent of the cavern replaced it quickly. Screams and groans greeted him upon his return to reality. Viserys was at Bran's bedside. He too was drawn to the sound of echoing screams.
Lady Kinvara, her labors bring me closer to parenthood and the restoration of the dynasty.
He finished with either a great deal of contempt or excitement. The stoic nature of his dialogue often left Bran wondering. Bran's fever had worsened the past few days. He now found it difficult to move. More poppy was his only relief, but Viserys often withheld it during his interrogations. Viserys held the Horn of Winter, and Bran was hoping Viserys would explain his intentions with it. Viserys was expressly tight-lipped regarding that one particular artifact.
Was there something about Sir Arthur's sword that interested you?
Bran asked as he shivered from his fever. Viserys licked his lips in anticipation of his retort.
The power of life and death, both of which we just witnessed.
Swords often bring death. Never have I seen steel give life. But perhaps my omniscience has failed me yet again.
Bran finished, and Viserys seemed impressed at Bran's resilience.
Indeed it has. Your failure, I mean. Dawn has given life. Perhaps someday I can reveal that to you.
Viserys smiled and Bran turned his head. His patience at this encounter had run its course. Viserys thought deeply before answering him.
Why are you so interested in Jon's birth and Daenerys' rebirth?
To learn the state of my house. Daenerys abdicated the throne in order to become a lesser god. My dearest cousin forsook the throne out of sentiment, weakness. Brandon Stark. What have I learned of what remains of my house? Weakness. But my dragons, my army and my sorcery will restore House Targaryen to its proper glory, back before the dance, back to the days of the Conqueror and of Maegor.
Viserys finished. Now it was clear to Bran Viserys had nothing but contempt for his distant family.
Your brother betrayed his house when he rejected our family's throne, and further so when he rejected our name. I assure you Sir Jon will die a dragon's death as he begs for my forgiveness for betraying our house. Such weakness.
Viserys was now drowning out the labor pains of the Red Priestess he was so keen on ignoring, when his next words became more personal.
Lord Brandon, tell me of the guilt you felt after murdering those farmers and framing your only living brother for it. You think I can't feel it, while I occupy your mind. Grief consumes you, Lord Stark, as it consumes Sir Jon. That will be his undoing. That and the broken bond with his dragon.